Thanks for joining us. I'm sure people would kind of funnel in. Feel free to ask questions on the message box, and we'll have a Q&A after. So to kick us off, this is our, I think, second or third exhibition with Space Scribbles. We've only recently founded Space Scribbles as a result of just this COVID response of, where's our community, like what is painting, how do the conversations now become relevant to the changing art world, and also capitalism, which is also a huge force in dictating what voices get heard. So we've started featuring artists on about kind of bi-monthly basis, and hoping to discover new kind of ways of integrating art, music, as well as other sorts of disciplines, hoping to kind of create a new dialogue within that space. So today we have Takuya from Japan. You're in Hokkaido.
Yes.
We have Minyoung, who's originally from Seoul, and now you're in UK, and you go to Slade, correct?
Yes.
And we have Charity, who's also one of my closest friends in New York. We're currently in the same city. I'm really happy to be near you. We went to school together, so you went to studio school, and now you're just working in your studio on Upper West Side. I guess to kick us off, I am going to just kind of throw this question, so start with just throwing some questions out in terms of, playfulness, because our exhibitions is titled Playtime. And when we initially reached out to artists, we were looking at their works and trying to come up with the title. And we decided to group Minyoung, Takuya, and Charity together because, one, visually speaking, there's a kind of risk and also like playfulness that's present in their works. So just to kick us off with this interview, could you guys talk a little bit about how playfulness played a role in your search for images, or even how you approach art making in your studio, if that's something that's present in how you work? I could actually direct.
Assign us.
I know, let's do that. Minyoung, your work is incredibly playful. And for those of you that missed or haven't seen the actual exhibition, I actually have some images that I could show, which I am going to share screen. Perfect. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So Minyoung, you do some kind of stop motion. How do I do this? So this is one of, I really love it. So you do some stop motion animation as well as painting, which, well, how do I do this? Sorry, guys, trying really, it's hard to moderate and, okay, perfect. So these are some of your paintings, and you've mentioned that you paint on surfaces that are unstretched.
Yes.
And you know what we noticed when we were curating the show is that we saw a lot of cats, like almost like this nightmare with cats, or some kind of moments when you are surprised at the end, almost like a plot twist, and the strange relationship between men and creatures. So this is like, some people might become uncomfortable like looking at it, but I actually find it like pretty humorous, almost like a dark humor, like this bee falling into this water and they're like chopsticks, so some kind of human activity, which I think is really interesting. So can you talk a little bit about like how do you even come up with those images, and is playfulness an element of what you're kind of trying to pursue?
Actually, my work is a mixture of creepiness and cruelty, but at the same time, the important thing is that it is mixture of humor as well. So
Mm-hmm.
humor plays a big role in my paintings, while my
Mm-hmm.
work expresses my dark experiences, feelings, and thoughts inside me. Humor offsets those dark side and allows me to look back things from the new perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to create the contradictory situation in which the situation in the work is serious but not that serious, embodying the encounter between disparate elements, such as the combination of pain and ridiculousness,
Mm-hmm.
uh, unfamiliarity and familiarity.
Is there a reason why cats are like kind of like an important element of your work?
Yeah. Um, so I think cats are one of images that I usually use in my work because I think I keep drawing cats that they're quite similar to my habits, and I love mysterious things, and I feel like they're surrounded by tons of mysteries as well. So I think it's because it's the creature that always seems to spy on spy on
Mm-hmm.
curious things, and doesn't know what it's thinking. So therefore, cats are always like omniscient beings in my works and are expressed as if they know the every situation in my works.
Okay. And I also see like other animals, which I think it's an interesting way of, I don't know, it's like imagination. It's almost like this world of imagination of what could have been like if they actually have the ability to like overcome humanity. But that's my own projection of how I sometimes read your images or even like encounter these stop animations. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I'm actually just gonna try to take turn and move along. So here we have Takuya's paintings.
Yeah.
And Takuya, you also went to studio school and you're actually currently in Hokkaido.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like your landscapes are really interesting because one, they have this sentiment or the colors of the northern Japan, and my family is also from northern Japan. We actually are both from Hokkaido, so I feel very drawn to your landscapes because it's something very personal, but also
Yeah.
what makes it interesting is we also both went to studio school, and
Yeah.
what's really interesting is when you kind of carry that kind of sentiment or where you're from through a very Western approach or aesthetics. So some of your works remind me of Matisse, just Fauvist, kind of this approach where landscapes are flattened and there's sense of utopia, which I think in Japanese culture, we do value harmony and we talk about wa, which is kind of like the circle of just a circle of peace. But it's a little different from this longing for paradise because we kind of make peace with nature and that nature being part of us. So can you talk a little bit about like, I know this title is Playtime, but I know that you also have other things that you kind of value in your work. Can you speak a little bit about like what exactly or what do you look for in your images when you create those works?
Um, I think my subject sometimes like playful because I put animals and people, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's not in here. I've been recently painted like a Buddha and like not. It's kind of funny way and yes, and I when I did, I think playfulness. Yeah, like the image, like the bathing suits and the lady, and like these paintings.
Mhm.
Like this guy was naked in the beginning, but I
Mhm.
put the like suits on,
Mm.
and this guy exists too. Like this guy who plays the cello is
Mhm.
the person, my neighbor. I painted him. I drew him, and then I put the painting in the land. I put the painting in the landscape, like
Mm.
like so that kind of like that, like my approach is like drawing from the
Mhm.
nature
Okay.
and put the figure in the landscape,
Okay.
and then those like stories are always like real. Like I'm not, I mean, it's like my painting has a lot of imagination, but at the same time it's it exists, like those giraffe. And I mean, like I drew from I went to the zoo and I looked at the giraffe, and then I drew them. So
Mhm.
all of my image is the stories are like real, and then it's
Okay.
around me. It's maybe that's why it's personal.
Okay.
And I'm always painting and drawing from the life, so
Mhm.
that makes that quality of like northern Japan, of Hokkaido.
Mm. Yeah,
If
I
that
really
makes sense.
like, I don't know, it reminds me of home, which is, I think, maybe that's not a quality present or quality that could be detected by people maybe outside of that context. But I think that the fact that because you're so connected to your surroundings, um, the playfulness just kind of comes through when it's you're experimenting with the way that you apply paint. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like sometimes you kind of go for this tighter kind of paint application where things are pretty in control. And usually I feel like those works, I'm talking about maybe this piece, for example, it feels a little more controlled in a way that like you have an idea of what it should look like. And I think this is from the series Paradise, and you were just really imagining what it's like when nature that had existed for such a long time has all these untold history and stories, and now as humans we're entering into that space, and what does that even look like? um, so it's a different kind of utopic relationship. And yeah, thanks for sharing. And I would actually get, that would actually be a really good question for the next part about how geographical location or time in history change the way any of you think about your paintings. And this might be more applicable to those of you that had traveled or migrated to other places. So if you have time to think about that, feel free to ponder as I move on to Charity's images. Charity, so I've seen your paintings, and I feel like you've kind of ventured into different pockets of subjects that interest you, but they still are very much close to the figures that you really love painting. So these are some of the images. Not all are shown in the exhibition, but these are some of the images that you've actually shared with me. So if you want to speak a little bit about, is playfulness ever like an element of your work, or how do you view your images? Yeah, feel free to share your thoughts.
Jump in. Can
Yeah.
you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's, what's so interesting is I think you were the one that made me think of my work as playful by asking me to do
Mm,
this, which
mm,
might sound silly because now that I see it from your viewpoint, I do see that. but I think maybe my process is playful or something.
Hmm.
And I feel like almost like I'm not, it might look like I'm trying to have playful imagery, but I think what I'm thinking of actually mostly when I'm painting, my two biggest like thoughts are like, I really think about composition a lot. I
Hmm.
love geometry, and I love geometry, and I love being able to pull some kind of like humanism out of my subject matter.
Hmm.
And so that's basically everything. I like to paint from life, like landscape, um, and figuratively. But even when I was in school, I would get the model would be in front of me, and I would not do the, you know, the I would play with the, I would be playing with the what I was looking at so that it felt right to me when I was like composing these pieces. So um, I remember my teacher used to come by, and she'd come by my easel and just start laughing. And, and she'd say, "Oh my God, I always love coming to your station because you make me laugh." And
Hmm.
I was really like just painting from life and playing with the composition, like the geometry of what I was looking at, and like picking up on anything that the model, like anything I was feeling from the model, and just combining
Hmm.
those two things. So that's a way of playing,
Hmm.
playfulness, I think.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah,
that
I do
that
have,
you brought up a really good point. Sorry if I interrupted you.
yeah,
I think playfulness is not necessarily like a casualness. It's a type of, for me, it's a type of inquiry. I mean, if you look at children, they play pretty seriously. They change rules, they do what feels right and makes sense. And what feels right could be easily taken as like kind of sentimental, but it really isn't when you have like a foundation of, formal training, or even like this deep kind of yearning to really understand the visual language. What feels right could sometimes be a great asset, because intuition is kind of largely a driving force, I think, in a lot of the ways we paint, a lot of the images we're drawn to, or even the way we um, just use colors. I mean, it could be, it's like endless. So I really love that when you said maybe it's my process that's playful more than like trying to have fun, like, just kind of put paint on the canvas, or even making playful images. So I think like that's pretty evident, because what I really like about your paintings is that I could see a very strong architectural structure, and I knew you were at some point an architect. I don't know if
yeah,
that has anything to do with the way you organize your perception, how you translate that experience. But I certainly see, and it's so satisfying when I could just kind of make out shapes like these zigzag triangle that is kind of, you it's like this mountainous area that you can actually like travel with your eyes. And there are some imageries that seem to be adopted from like, more ancient paintings, or even I know you like, I think you like Giotto, and I really love
yeah,
Giotto, and he has such a strong sense of composition, but also this like sensibility in the way that he depicts figures. So I think this is from Giotto.
it
um,
is.
yeah,
Yeah, it's from
I
two
really love
paintings.
that.
It's from two paintings and my visit to the Parthenon. Yeah,
Hmm.
Parthenon. I think
And
that's the word.
you recently came back. It's not really recent because we had a whole year pandemic, but
It feels like
it
I
feels
just
recent.
got back.
Let's just cancel 2020 and look at 2019. You
Yeah,
came back from a Hohenberg Travel Award,
yeah,
so you actually were really immersed in Italy with all the
yeah.
images.
And I would say like it's so funny because like when yeah I went to it I was like I was allowed to go anywhere in Europe, and I thought I kind of froze like a deer in the headlights, and I
Yeah.
figured I should I was like okay, where should I go? um
Hmm.
so I just decided to go, honestly, like I'd never been to Italy,
Hmm.
and I wanted to see things that were site specific. So I looked at cave paintings in in northern Spain. I went to Madrid, but I did, and what happened was, you know, I thought, I don't know anything about the Renaissance whatsoever, so I'm gonna look at that. And then I just got pulled. I'm very attracted to very ancient art and sculptures, you know, ancient sculpture. I think from maybe, yeah, my architecture background. I'm really interested in what lasts, like through, you know, through time, like what remains after so many years. Like, what is the thing that we like start, you know, holding higher and higher on a pedestal? And so I think there's such gravity and weight to that. So I study those things along with, you know, this playfulness that I'm hopefully like trying to entertain myself with inventing.
Yeah, thank you. That's perfect, because now you gave us a segue. And maybe you can answer this, or anyone else could take over if you want to, but since we're on this topic, like you were talking a little bit about your time in Italy and how you're surrounded by literally history that has now remained, and it's kind of like an artifact that tells us about how people communicated, or even it tells a lot. Like painting says a lot, and which is why it's such a wonderful thing, because it's a type of language that we are entering into. So how do you view your work in a context of art history, or even more specifically, like the things that you were looking at? Like, how do you kind of make that connection point and the way you create?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. You mean, how do I use it? How do I use it? The information?
Like if there's any relationship between like what you're trying to do in your work right now, that's that you're kind of expanding on the conversations that existed before you. You could literally answer it in any way, but that's kind of how I would narrow it down to.
Yeah, I mean, just from observing, I'm really attracted to sculpture right now. And yeah, actually I always have been, I should say. I didn't know it until recently. Anyway, I think what I love so much about different types of sculpture from different time periods is the incredible amount of human connection. I feel like humanism, like this feeling of being a human being, and then the beautiful, just formal shape and line, and you know, the shape and the form has just been, it's like timeless, solid expression. Even the handprint on the wall is like, when I saw that, I literally got like not cry, but like I got really emotional, because I felt like that person had just done that yesterday. I just felt like I could touch their hand too. I felt like we were in the same space. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It makes me want to cry too. This is not the time for it, but we can talk more about that later. I'm sorry.
Cry later.
I'll cry when I hang up on the Zoom call, everyone, just a heads up. What about, you know, Minyoung and Takuya? Like, do you feel like is there anything about art history or anything in the past that kind of either motivate you to paint, or things that you're really curious about and you want to keep exploring? Feel free to take it away.
Yeah. My work is like combination of Egyptian art and surrealist context, I think. Because the awkwardness and awkward expressions and actions taken by the figure in my work are quite similar to images of Egyptian art. In fact, I get a lot of inspiration from the art. In particular, the expression of the feet, which are mostly expressed by side view, and stiff and clumsy gestures may be the examples. Also, I think it can be interpreted in the context of surrealism, because things are quite familiar with us, but might not be possible in the real life. can be often seen in my paintings.
So you mentioned like Egyptian art and the almost like this profile view that's kind of you see. So with Egyptian art, you could see everything, which is kind of their how do I say it? Like their intention for it is that not only the image, but like the mortal body, like there's some kind of significance in how they painted and drew because they want to preserve the existence of that person into the afterlife. Like, do you feel like that's something that you kind of think about in your work, or you're more drawn to just the aesthetics of Egyptian art?
I think more into the aesthetic aspect.
Okay. And that's okay, because I think I love Egyptian, I love Egyptian art. Like it's actually one of my favorite wings in the Met. I go there all the time. And you've also mentioned surrealist.
Yeah.
I think like this part is really playful because it's like, you know, it's not real, but it's believable.
Mhm.
And it's almost like there's this hierarchy of creature or creation of like cats doing things that are human-like, and then there are humans that are either they fall victim to the cat, or they always go through some kind of tragedy that's
Yeah.
comical. But then there are also like another element of just like things that I mean, I don't know if mermaids exist. I doubt that they do, but there's an element of like things that you kind of wish to be true. So do you ever think about like those kind of things, like I want to have a world full of like all these things, or they just naturally come to you as you make your images?
I really don't know why I'm fancying those kind of like mermaid and witch images, because I think maybe I was inspired by seeing many folk tales when I was very young, and many videos like mermaids or something like that.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think that's the why.
thank you. Takuya, do you have any thoughts about kind of like how you think about history, art history, or like, you know, painters that you like, and kind of inviting them into your studio, in terms of how you even paint or composition even? If you don't, that's okay, because I have plenty of questions.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I like some of the painters. I also went to Italy. And what I love about Italy was I like, you know, I like looking at I did like looking at a lot of sculpture. And after Italy, I went to France, and I looked at all those paradise paintings by Bonnard and some other painters. And I particularly liked Delan's. He had a huge paradise paintings in Paris. And when I looked at that painting, I want to paint it. I want to paint like that. And maybe that was 2 years ago I went to France, and I've been thinking about it. And finally, I'm like last year and this year, I'm finally kind of painting those, was able to paint those paradise images. And like my ideas, I think it's not like something new, but I think originality is very important, but I'm not like too worried about it. I just want to paint like art my opinion, art is like, if the heaven exists, it's like something between like this world and heaven. Art is like something in between,
Mm,
because we can use imagination. We can
mm,
paint like something it doesn't exist.
mm,
So I think my goal's to paint like something like that. Like a, maybe I hope art is like a salvation.
hmm.
So
Wow.
I mean my that's my goal. I mean it's I'm not reaching it, but like my you know my goal. And I think color, you know, I love colors. And also to finish the painting, geometry is very important for me also, to
Mm,
finish the painting, because I don't feel it's finished, like
hmm,
if it's just colors.
hmm.
So
Yeah, that's a really, you just said something really poetic. And I think a lot of us, I mean, I assume everybody here does some kind of art or is a painter. And I find that really poetic when you said art is what is between heaven and earth. Um, and it reminded me of this quote that my teacher, painting teacher from New York Studio School, Susanna Coffey, she sat us down and we had this discussion one day about what is painting. And it doesn't even have to be painting, like what is art? Um, and she said, painting is the one proof that interiority exists. We could share them with the world while our dreams remain locked within our bodies. And I think that's something that we all experience at some point, where art is the only safe space. And I often feel that for myself, in a time when there's turmoil and there's a lot of things. When you look outside, it's really not that pretty. But art is one safe place, because it's a place that we could almost travel far and wide and still come out safe but changed. And I think that's a really beautiful and poetic sentiment that I think really changes you. And I really love that you kind of have also mentioned how, like, you don't think that originality is that important when you pursue images and art making, because it's something that you're always going to be part of. And what is original is not, it's kind of overrated. My opinion, maybe I shouldn't talk so much about my opinions, but um so this is like a good, really good place to kind of start opening up, like, what is it, in a world full of so many images and media, like how do you even sort through all of it to find images that speak to you? How do you allow yourself the space to think and process this world when there's so much that demands our attention? Takuya, do you have any thoughts about, like, you've mentioned you like Duran and Bernard and all these painters that were before you, and you're kind of hinging on these experience to find your own image. Like, what does that even look like?
I like the art history. Like I'm like, when I think about art history, I love art history. I love all these, most of the art in the past. But like we talked about originality a little bit just now.
Mhm.
And I think in art history, like I kind of fear, not fear, but art history, like to be in the art part of art history, I think it has to be very original, maybe in the past.
Mm,
Um, but to me, originality is not that important. And
mm,
I mean, it's not about art. I like Beatles a lot, and
mhm,
the music.
mhm,
And like I like Let It Be a lot, the very famous song everybody knows.
mm,
And I mean, I'm not Christian, but this song is about Christian, and then it's like nothing original about it, I guess, the lyrics, but it's like still moves me, and then maybe moves other people. And I mean, I think that's important. And the question was, what was that question was?
Do you need help?
uh,
I could say it
how
again.
does risk player?
It's in a world full of so many images and
Yeah,
media.
yeah. So I look at a lot of images, but you know, I paint from life, and my painting might look like something else, but I'm taking the image from the nature, so I think it's still something my own. So so that's what that's my like answer to like, that's my answer for like, you know, not copying somebody's image, or you know, because if when it's like when we see so much images in computer and all those places, like it's gonna affect us anyway. So I don't know, I'm just not so worried about it,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I'm painting from nature,
Hmm.
and I think that's gonna solve the problem.
Charity, do you have any thoughts about this? Because I know we kind of we talk about like, oh, like they're, I mean, trying to find a balance between like absorbing the world, and in the New York City art scene, it's like that's endless. It's just like openings after openings after openings. And remember, you and I would like go to openings, like 5 openings in one night, and that's kind of the culture that we live in, and in a city that kind of is almost oversaturated with art. How do you sort through those images and find what you really are drawn to versus like what sells or even like what's popular? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I just came up with one while you were saying all that.
Awesome. Perfect.
Because I agree with what Takia said about during the pandemic, particularly, I found that being inundated with, I feel like there is a lot of imagery in so many ways. So anyway, yeah, I think that studying nature is always a great place to go. You mentioned the interior world that we have, and I think you know, sticking very true to that, those two things for me. But the third that I'll add is discipline. For myself, meaning like sometimes like I will being dedicated to figuring something out as an artist, like light, space, uh, color, I don't know, you know, shadows, whatever it is that I'm interested in, and and being really regular about my investigation. That for me is how I handle the excessive imagery that's going on, because I do feel like there's, you know, obviously a ton of like narrative out there, and it's sometimes I think, who cares, you know, about your interior world, you know. You know what I mean? Like it's just, there's so much. It's like but so I think like very generically, like this idea of discipline for myself is how I'm navigating it. And I think I'm also experimenting with the idea of time. I always think about time a lot, but like how much time I spent looking at something, will that make, what will that bring to the image?
Mm,
playing with an image in that kind of fourth dimensional way,
mm,
rather than just, image after image. I have trouble spending a lot of time on things because I have fast energy when I work.
mm.
So I'm trying to slow down.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts. I love that you mentioned discipline, which is something we don't really, we know the discipline of working and discipline of showing up to the studio and like, I gotta just put in the hours, but there's also discipline and restraint. And I think that's not talked about enough. And this is not completely like, what you're saying, but I think when I lived in New York, just going into the studio and just painting away. And I realized I've come to a point where I'm just painting for the sake of putting in the hours and going to shows for the sake of just being there. And at some point, like I've kind of lost touch with the way I want to speak. Painting is a language, and
Totally.
I'm not saying one language is better than the other. It's just we all speak differently. We all have different things that we value in the way we articulate. And I find that it's incredibly important to actually take the time, but also the discipline to restrain and really carry questions into what we
Yeah.
make. When COVID first hit, I had no sense of how to navigate this visually. And back before that, I was painting a lot of representational paintings about Hong Kong protests. And it was easy because there's this entry point where there's a strong narrative. It's about injustice. There's also imageries that are already available through journalism. And in every way, the subject matter was more than enough for me to go on for a year. But when COVID hit and I went back to Hong Kong, I think that part of craving for connection had already been fulfilled largely, and I lost touch with what is it, what is my question. And so I just started making a lot of really weird just paint splashes on a paper, and it didn't make sense for a long time until I realized it's actually important for me to start having questions, whether it's about art history. What kind of questions do I have for these master painters that I'm not understanding, or even like what is it that I care about, either formally or subject matter, but mostly formally. I think formal language is a huge part of painting because you can get really sentimental and get carried away by the narrative that you're trying to like capture by saying, oh, it's about these two lovers, just getting caught in this turbulent affair. It's easy to kind of attach narratives and meanings, but when your painting transcends that kind of script, that's when it becomes timeless, in my opinion. I think there's
Totally
something
agree.
really beautiful about, sometimes religious paintings do that too, where it's like, okay, I get that it's about the Christ, but the way they paint it is what made that narrative so much more powerful. And I think maybe that's not what you're talking about, but I feel
No, I
that
love what you're saying. Almost like the narrative is the limitation that the boundary that they can then, you know, uh, the limitation they can use,
mm,
those religious paintings to play with formalism and painterly stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, I love paint, you know. So
you
that's
have
kind
to,
of my
right? I
main.
mean,
I really do. I love it. I love it. And I like, obviously other medium too. I'm actually, yeah, but yeah. Um, the narrative can be the limit, I'm saying the wrong word, but I forget what the limitation that can help you grow. But
mm.
yeah, like the discipline of, like I spent this whole year just studying the art history I never did.
And we went
Painfully.
to grad school, by the way.
Yeah, I went to
It's
grad school with,
possible.
yeah, knowing only like a handful of artists. And then,
Mm,
yeah, and that was, I just like, what happens if you know a lot about art? Like, let's not ride on the fact that you don't know, like, I didn't know that much art history when I started my MFA. And now I'm like, well, what happens if you do know a lot about art history? Then
mhm.
what do you do? All different ways to have that. Just I love what you said about your experiences too.
Thank you. I didn't mean to say, hey guys, now it's my art talk.
No, I loved
But
it.
there's one thing that I thought about when you were saying that is that for a long time I've resisted art history, and this may not be applicable to everyone, but I know that there is a sect of artists that say, I don't want anything to do with art history. Like, I don't want to be influenced by that. And also, like, I'm afraid that the more I look at it, the more it would affect the way I work. For me personally, I just hate reading, and I always feel this sense of not unworthiness, but I compare, and it's hard for me to be around like great painters in the history, and I just tend to be burdened by it, because I felt like, how do we even unpack art history? Like, how do we even kind of understand art for what it is when it's such a big thing? You know, it's so much bigger than you, and it's, you know, when you look at Egyptian art, you can't help but to look at other forms of art. Same thing with like contemporary art. I mean, it came through so many generations of art that I felt like when I'm looking at one thing, it's almost like a computer screen where you have like 20,000 tabs open all at the same time, and you're trying to absorb it simultaneously. And I was burdened by it when I went to grad school, because I felt like I couldn't even get myself through that door. So I just completely shut that door. And then it wasn't until I actually graduated, you know, from your studio school, that I realized, you know what, it's actually okay if I don't want to talk to certain painters, meaning it's okay if I don't really like certain painters or certain art movements. I don't need to force myself to understand every single thing. And I kind of have this image of just like going to a dinner party. It's this giant mansion. You walk through the door and you see tables just filled with tables, and all the painters are just sitting there talking to each other. And I realized it's okay for me to just, to start with, it's a buffet of conversations that are happening all at once. And it's okay for me to just go over and talk to the painters that I want to talk to, choose the table that I want to be part of, and kind of go off from there. But that's just my little sentiment. And I'm so glad that you kind of brought up the discipline and just all these other parts of art making that don't really get talked about enough, because it's easy to talk about art through art, but it's when you start adding the human part of what it means to be an artist, I think that's when it gets interesting. So this is maybe more applicable as a question for Minyoung and Takuya, because you both kind of have this, you both, you know, you're Minyoung, you're originally from Seoul, Korea, and Takuya, you're originally from, I believe, Tokyo. Did you grow up in
Yes.
Tokyo? And then
Yeah.
and then you both kind of went and studied art in the, you're in UK, and then you were in America at some point. Like, has that changed the way you kind of think about images at all? Like, how does that geographical location affect the way you think about what you make? I don't know. Yeah, you can go first, Takuya. I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer well, but I'm teaching art in my studio here with my wife, and my wife went to school in Tokyo, and the school system here in America is very different. Right now, I have a high school student. She wants to go to art school in Tokyo, and I have to help her to like pass the exam. They have a very difficult exam. It's like you have to draw like really well, like, but it's the drawing in the sense not like a studio school or maybe people who are learning in America. It's like, so like the style here is like they don't think about composition so much. It's like they're like really focused focusing on the surface, I think.
Mm,
Like the surface, like if you draw the bottle, like it really looks like a bottle. Like it's like amazing, like by the first look. And that's the drawing people are doing here before they go to college, art school. Otherwise, you don't get into the art school. So I think that's if I went to school here, art school here, maybe I'll become completely different kind of painter. Because maybe because I was educated in America, like just doing the surface work is not very important, but it's like so much importance here. It's kind of sad, but because like surface work, I think you can do it later in your life. Like you don't, you know, in the beginning, you should be experimenting and do a lot of different kind of things.
yeah, I think what you're saying about surface work, I think you're also talking about like that realistic capturing of images. So you're trying to render an image
Yeah, it's
that
like a
makes it look.
rendering. Yeah.
So you said that's not, you know, so what do you think is different for your work? Like you've mentioned like if you stayed, you might have done that, but instead you've kind of took on a different path. And what are some things that are important then?
I think it's like if it makes sense or not, but artwork has like a spirit,
Mm-hmm.
and also the soul. And the soul exists in the painting, like maybe the volume, you know, that if we don't feel the volume, that doesn't matter like if it's abstract painting or representational painting. We might not feel the soul. So maybe like doing a lot of rendering, maybe there's spirit in the painting, but maybe not very soulful, my opinion. But you know, that might not make sense. And
That's okay. I think it makes sense, but it may mean different things to different people when you say soul and the spirit.
And what's the difference between?
Right, exactly.
And
mhm.
yeah, I was like a famous Japanese poet was writing about this, and then it really like the bell in my brain, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was writing about Paul Klee, and he said most of the abstract painting don't have a soul, has a spirit. And he said, but Paul Klee's paintings, it's kind of like abstract paintings, but has soul and the spirit at the same time. And then I kind of understand what he's saying.
Yeah, maybe that also speaks to the timelessness, the quality of timelessness when Charity was kind of alluding to like time in painting. And I think when we talk about time, we're talking about something permanence and something of weight. And I think when you talk about soul and spirit in painting, which I think it could easily get kind of carried away into that different realm, different kind of conversation. But I think there's a reason why certain paintings kind of draw us. And I don't think it's just that visual aesthetics, it's more. There's a weight of gravity that pulls us in. And I think it's a mirror that you're kind of invited into, to kind of, like, once again, the interior world of someone, which I think is soul. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's an important element of works that we don't really get talked about, at least in the art shows that I go to in galleries in New York. Or we don't talk about that because there's no quantifying factor. There's no measurement of that. Like, how do you even measure, the soulfulness in painting? So we're getting close to 10:30, so you guys are more than welcome to submit questions. But I do want to ask Min Young this one thing before moving on to the Q&A. You kind of experiment with the stop motion animation as well as painting. Have you always done those two things, even when you were in Korea, or did you just start kind of pursuing this interdisciplinary work when you went to Slade?
Oh yeah, before the Slate, I used to have a exhibition, like Seoul exhibition in Seoul. At that time, I made some animation works and ceramic works, also some drawings. But I think what Takwa mentions is very similar to in Korea's situation, like like college exam is very similar, and I feel that the work is very changed significantly over a year and a half in the UK. In fact, the theme of my work has not been changed for 4 years while working in Korea, but the way I deal with it and the way I look at it and the media I use is totally changed. I think the impact is probably due to the gloomy weather in the UK and some loneliness and the fact that I'm a foreigner and I'm a stranger here affected me to focus on painting. And the thing is, the lockdown period made me focus on paintings and other works. Yeah, so I tried to make some animations to not to get bored. Yeah, so I was trying to many different ways to make some works.
Yeah, I think it kind of makes sense now when you were talking about like being a foreigner, and I kind of sense that weird, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like what is it called, diaspora is such a thing in art. You do actually, I mean, for a long time I paint images, and I think there's always a longing to be understood, the longing to kind of fit myself into a corner of a room, whether it's art history or a culture. And I like that, you're kind of taking that with you into your work. Yeah, it's always interesting looking at your animation, because there's always like an element of either accident or this like ill intention or some kind of danger that doesn't always get resolved. And I feel like that's kind of sometimes a mentality that I carry as a foreigner. Like, I have no idea where my home is anymore. Like, I grew up in Hong Kong as a half Japanese, half Chinese kid, moved to America when I was 17, went to Florida, which had no Asians whatsoever. And like, you kind of pick up habits on like survival. And so it's funny when I kind of see those elements coming through your work. It's like trying to survive through this mishap or some kind of accidents, and sometimes it doesn't work. Most of the time I feel like in your animation it just ends up being kind of just a tragedy, but it's funny because it's like this dark humor. So I appreciate your thoughts and thank you for sharing. So now we're actually at 10:30 and I think it's a good time to kind of go into the Q&A. Thank you for staying with us so far because I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. This is my first time ever and I really appreciate just the participation by staying. Please don't go. So thank you for staying. So Jacob asked a question and feel free, Charity, Takuya, and Minyoung, feel free to answer if you feel like you want to say answer. So something more personal. At what point in your lives did you decide to become painters, and how did you know? Is there like a light bulb moment, or it just gradually happened? Like, well, what's your story?
I
Okay.
I wanted to become a painter kind of late because I mean, when I was in high school, I started like drawing and I was interested in painting and art, but I really didn't know anything about paintings. And I went to college and I wanted to become an artist, but I didn't think I could I didn't think I could make a living with it. So my dad was an architect, so maybe I will do. I want to become an architect, and I started taking drawing class in college, and after that, I really wanted to become a painter. Maybe I was about 20 or something like that.
And you never
So,
look back. You're still
yeah,
here.
I'm still here. I'm still doing the paintings, and I'm kind of believing myself. I'm gonna do this, and like, yeah. So that's my answer.
So I just have like a really brief thought as you were saying that, and I'm looking at the screen, so I see 13 people on the screen. I don't know some of you, but I'm pretty sure at least 90% of us are painters. We're insane for doing this.
Yeah.
I just need to say this because I think it's a wonderful thing, but I sometimes feel like, why are we crazy enough to actually, do this thing? So I'm just kind of expressing my sentiment. What about you, Charity? I know you didn't paint for a while and then you came back to school for it.
Yeah, I came back. Oh my gosh, ditto. My dad was an architect also,
Oh,
and I, I, um, I knew I'll say I always knew I wanted to be an artist, um, forever, like when I was really little. Um, but I also, I liked math a lot and, I liked writing. So anyway, I went to school for architecture. In high school, I knew I wanted to be a painter, but my parents were like, no, we're not sending you to school to do that. So I just became an architect. And I tried to paint. And then 4 years ago, it really was very recently, 4 or 5 years ago, I just decided I never wanted another job ever again. And because I wanted to paint. So I just I completely jumped off the cliff. Like I had no idea how to make money as an artist, but I knew when I was really little that's what I wanted to do, and I didn't do it for I just didn't do it for most of my life basically, and then a couple years ago I thought that I just closed my eyes and moved forward. Um, so
How has it been? Like, has it been like
Yeah.
a rewarding?
Oh, it's completely changed my life. Like, I'm so glad I did it because I always wanted, I knew I wanted to do it before I even really had drawn a lot. When I was,
Mhm.
some of my very earliest memories are of drawing, like with crayons. Like, I can remember drawings I made. Like, I remember how it's that interior space that that I felt so safe to just completely explore. Very safe space. Not like the world wasn't safe, but when I say safe, I mean a paradise. Like,
Mm.
this is where I want to be. Um, and also, this is where I communicate the best. This is where I'm like at my best self, when I'm actually making. And I tried all these other things. But yeah, I think what happened was one day I just had this realization. It dawned on me that other people were artists, like other people were doing it, and
Yeah.
they were alive, you know. And I was like, maybe I can do it too.
Lorraine just had a laugh when you said they are alive. No, but it's kind of true, right? I
It's
think
true.
that's a
I'm like, they're
really
not starving to death. Maybe.
right. And even if they are, it
Yeah.
must be worth it for them to going through that. I mean, maybe starvation is an exaggeration because we're all really fortunate enough to live in a society that is rich and wealthy. But it's true. Like, I think the narrative of starving artists is so prevalent that you believe you can't thrive because you've committed to yourself to the search of beauty and that perfecting that language. So yeah, I think I understand that. And I remember before we graduated, I was telling you, maybe I won't be an artist. It's too much. And I don't know if you remember like me telling you that. And I just remember you looked at me with certainty and said, I'm just gonna do this. Like, I'm like full on, like, I'm not looking back. And I remember, man, like I wish I had that kind of force. So I remember that being really striking, and that actually encouraged me a lot because I realized, like, if she said she can, if Charity says she's gonna do it, maybe I can do it too, you know, like we can all suffer together and hopefully make it to the
Yes.
other end. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Jacob had asked or said he likes Takuya's story of seeing a painting in France, and it's still challenging him today. I'm wondering if Minyoung or Charity can remember specific encounters with works of art that had a strong impact. So maybe Minyoung, if you could talk a little bit about if there's any artwork that you've encountered that had really changed you or had a strong impact.
Well, every time I look at the artist, I don't know, you know him, Jan Schuvenmayer. I love his animation works, and I was so inspired by seeing his works every time. And his works made me think about another perspectives and another compositions. So I can whenever I am depressed and I was struggling with my works, I I watch his animations or his works a lot, so I can deal with some that period, I think.
Thank you. Can any of you speak to how your paintings have entered into your life? This is actually a question from Madeline. Can you speak to how your paintings have entered into your life? We often talk about how our understanding of the world influences our work, but how do your paintings shape the way you view the world? It's kind of a complex question. So it's essentially like, how do your paintings shape the way you view the world? Instead of the other way around. We often talk about the external influences, like the paintings we see, the people we encounter, the cultural narratives that we have been part of, affecting the way we work. But is there like a reverse relationship where, because you're painting those images, because you're kind of carrying those questions into the way you paint or work, like, has that changed your perspective on your environment?
I can say one thing.
Mhm.
I know like this is gonna like whenever I was in like a art class like at school, a lot of times the teachers would like make comments about art and I would just be like, that's totally like I'm gonna use that in my actual life, whatever you just said. And so I feel like that happens a lot, like whatever process I'm involved in with my own artwork is can be a bit reflective of maybe how I'm going through life as well.
Mm.
Like we were talking about you know, we were talking about discipline before. I'm finding that helpful to get through the pandemic. Certain types of discipline about, you know, and then also intuition's a big thing that I'm interested in, my intuition and when I suppress it and when I indulge it. And that's very much happens when I'm working and in life. Like you know, how can I trust? Because we're so inundated with so much. It's like, you know, I just think it's interesting to, you know, your intuition, how much you rely on it and when to not use it. Anyway, sorry, I'm repeating myself. Those are two things.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a difficult question, right? Because it's like, how aware can you be in the way you live life? I mean, yes, certainly there are like consciousness and like all that stuff, but I think like because it's such a part of your life that you don't even really think about how you necessarily view the world, which is why I think like conversations with artists are always so helpful, because you realize they don't think like we do. And when we talk about art, is exciting because it's like, oh, I see this from Giotto, or you know, I see this from all these other painters that, you know, kind of carry certain perspectives, and when you discuss it, that's when it gets interesting. But I love this question because it makes me think a lot too, like how has that changed, how has that reflected, you know, the growth, or how my process had evolved. And I think this is like an ongoing kind of dialogue for ourselves, but also like amongst painters, in terms of like how kind of like that synergy between art making and also like living. So thank you for taking up the challenge to answer this, because I would have no way of knowing what to say. From Sachika, how do you cope with or make sense of the audience perception of your work? You know, because it might vary from what you intended it to be. So when that happens, like, does it affect your process? Um, do you have any thoughts? Maybe Takuya or Minyoung, you guys, one of you could answer this if you would like.
Is that means like something, if somebody said like while you're painting, or like unfinished painting, and then somebody look at it and then say something, and then if I change my approach, is that?
Yeah, so I think it's more or less about reception, like how people receive your paintings that are different from what you meant. Would you then change? I hope that's what I'm saying, Sachika. Like, if you can correct me, feel free to type in the box. But that's kind of what I gather from the question.
Yeah, so basically can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So basically my question, like I struggle with that a lot, is like the kind of not just the message, but what I intended for my final works too. It doesn't have to be like an unfinished work. The kind of message that I intended when I put it sort of like put it out in the world for the audience to see, and how that kind of changes. Does that change your process of if you have something very specific that you want in your work and it's not showing through the audience's eye? Does that affect your process of working, or does that change how you view your own paintings? Was my question.
I mean, it probably affects like somehow, but I mean, I don't think, I feel like it doesn't affect me what like other people say about my work, but that might not be true. Like, I don't know, like, yes, but I feel, to me, like whatever audience feels my painting is depends on them. So it doesn't affect me so much. But maybe some people, if you have like the narratives are so like particular, like if you want to tell the story, it's very particular way. Maybe if the audience took it in different way, maybe you have to change the work. But yeah, I don't know if I answered well, but that's my answer.
Min Young or Charity, do you guys have any thoughts about this?
My thought is quite similar to Takuya's. While I'm painting, I'm not that distracted by any other's opinion, but after my paintings, whenever someone see my painting and then comment or advise me, then I think about that there's thoughts, and then next work maybe it would be changed or it may be helpful, but not while the painting.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to insert my thought, but this is just a kind of like a thought. I think there's an, it's not a control issue, but I think like it's tricky when you start crossing over to like a narrative that exists outside of the narrative of painting. So I think like it's so tricky to talk about painting because painting comes with its own language. And then we also impose our human construct language into it. So for example, maybe this is like a better example. Like I made a lot of Chinese paintings. What I mean by that is paintings that capture like cultural events or traditions. For my thesis show, it was a painting of a Chinese dragon dancing. And there are people standing inside the Chinese dragon. So it really is hard to kind of detect what it is unless you're a cultural insider. And I remember we were sitting at the crit and one of the panelists or painters had said, oh, I really love that clown. And automatically that painting shifted direction because now the painting is about a clown, not about a Chinese dragon. So I found that really difficult for me to kind of overcome because then it's like, okay, do I need to paint the Chinese dragon more realistically for people to understand it? Or is it okay? And I think like partially that has to do with my side of control of like, am I willing to let go of what the interpretation of how people read my paintings? But then on the other side, it's like, okay, like, am I able to convey at least the sensation of being part of that cultural event through the paint and through how colors collide with each other? And I think that's a separate narrative. So I'm still kind of swimming in between those places because I feel like it's difficult to achieve the best of both worlds in one painting. So what I ended up doing is actually just letting go of a lot of things and starting from zero. And I've decided to just explore more formal qualities of painting before I insert my own set of narratives or stories that I want people to understand. And sometimes I think those things come later as a result of a body of work from years that you create, and people start to understand where you come from. But that's my thought. I mean, feel free, since we're all in Q&A, like, I don't know if this is something anyone wants to kind of share. I'm still a very young painter and I feel like I don't really know a whole lot. So we have very seasoned painter. I'm just throwing the ball to Lorraine. So if you want to speak about that, I would love to hear from you. I love your paintings. And I think, yeah, I just don't know what I'm saying right now. So, but if anyone wants to speak about that, feel free to pitch in. Yeah. I hope
I mean,
that
I
answers.
feel like we are young painters, you know, so it's like we all just, I mean, I think that was a good point. Like my own, it's an interesting question, but I think my response to it is like when I'm painting, you know, like it's always that big question of when do you stop painting on your painting? Like when is it finished? Which sometimes, you know, but there's always that moment where I literally hear a click and I'm like, okay, stop. And then sometimes I might want to go back, but I know it's like that. I'm like, I'll just put one thing and I'm like, okay, like it just sinks together and I'm like, okay, I think we're done. Um, and then like when other people comment, it's more like I'm just observing them taking it in rather than taking anything personally because I'm already like, once that thing happened, I'm already like, it, you know, I'm on to the next and I'm not gonna, it's not like it's not mine, but it's kind of already like not, it's, I'm just watching people like, respond. But then again, like I see so many paintings where I'm like, I should really go back in there. I know what I need to do now, but I'm, you know, sometimes I'll make separate paintings of those paintings to try to see if I can figure it out. I don't know. That would be my response on that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really nice. It's kind of like when you know it's a good stopping point to talk to somebody, you're like,
happens.
okay. You're like, no more questions left. I'm satisfied. It's
like it stopped for me. So
I love that you heard a click. I was a little concerned.
No, I
if
like
you hear a
kind of
click in
see
your
it.
brain.
No, I just see it all just like locked together, and maybe you know I
Mm.
definitely can see when I make too many marks, and I've destroyed tons of paintings. Obviously, like I know when I go too far too. But
All right. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts? If not, I think it's a really good stopping point. It's before 11. It's 10:52. Once again, I'm so thankful that you all joined. I've been super nervous, if you can't tell, and everything that I've messed up would be captured on the recorded video. Thank you for staying and asking really thoughtful questions and just still being an artist and creating works, because I think that's incredibly important for us to just continue to create and have conversations that are important and still have questions that we carry in our search for images and the way we create. So I think this is a good stopping point. So I'm going to just pause the video